Created by John Broome and artist Gil Kane, ever since he made his debut in DC Comics Showcase in issue number 22, way back in 1959, Hal Jordan has been the definitive Green Lantern for most fans. While there have been those who have taken up the Ring of Power after him, I think the first name that usually comes to mind when you think of Green Lantern is Hal Jordan. Now, nearly 15 years later, after Ryan Reynolds donned the ring, we finally get another live-action Green Lantern adaptation in HBO's Lanterns TV series. What I found interesting is that this TV series goes in the exact opposite direction of Reynolds' portrayal of the character, with Kyle Chandler playing a much grittier and older Hal Jordan, taking Aaron Pierre's younger John Stewart reluctantly under his wing. With the very first episode ending with such a massive cliffhanger, this show looks set to deliver. So join me today as I explore everything there is to know about the greatest Green Lantern of all time, Hal Jordan. From his origins, powers, fall from grace, and redemption, I will be leaving no stones unturned to give you a greater understanding of this iconic character. Now, without further ado, let's begin. Is he even superhuman or just a guy with a ring? Among all the aliens, mutants, and products of freak accidents, the reason I love characters like Batman or Hal Jordan is the fact that even without the ring or the cape, they are just normal and regular humans. However, to say that he is just a guy with a ring would be doing this iconic character a grave injustice, in my opinion. After all, he isn't just a Green Lantern. Hal Jordan is the definitive Green Lantern of DC Comics. While he is able to fly through the vacuum of space and create hard light constructs, which are only limited by his own imagination and willpower, at the end of the day, Hal is still human. However, I think people sometimes forget that he was in the military earlier in his life, which means he is no slouch when it comes to combat and harsh training, even if his role was primarily to test airplanes. While the stories of Superman and Wonder Woman usually revolve around the framework of their superhuman physique and abilities, despite having one of the most powerful weapons in the universe, I feel that Hal's humanity means that his adventures mostly focus on him overcoming obstacles and threats thanks to his enormous willpower, which also happens to be a vital part of his construct's power. Born to Martin and Jessica Jordan, Hal was the middle child among their 3 children and developed a fascination with flying because his father was a test pilot. However, tragedy would strike the Jordans when his father would die in a fatal plane crash, following which, despite his family wishes, Hal would join the American Air Force, seemingly overcoming the fear and trauma he had developed due to his father's death. I think it's important to take this into account when talking about his nature, because this was nothing short of superhuman in my opinion. So I think it's fair to say that while he is not superhuman biologically like some of his foes and friends, it is his humanity that allows him to perform superhuman acts with the help of his ring. Where did the ring actually come from? As I was saying earlier, Hal would join the United States Air Force against his family wishes and become a test pilot just like his father. I believe some comics have him grounded after he has an altercation with an officer, during which time a ship crash lands near the base he is stationed in Coast City. When Jordan goes to inspect the wreck, he finds within it a dying alien called Abin Sur, whose power ring chooses the first person on the scene, which is Hal, as its new wielder. In case you didn't know, the lantern rings, irrespective of their color, are able to choose their next wielder autonomously on their own, as long as the candidate fulfills their criteria. In the case of the Green Lantern power ring, the candidate must have sufficient willpower and the ability to overcome fear, which Hal had plenty of. The ring doesn't discriminate based on species and race as long as they fulfill the criteria we just mentioned. I believe that the ring will also travel across the universe until it finds a worthy wielder and can't just be handed down from one person to another, although there have been instances in which people have stolen the rings of others to use as their own. This is something that is a major part of this video, which I will be discussing later, so stick around. Abin Sur was part of the Green Lantern Corps, which comprises 3,599 members who are each responsible for one sector of the universe. I think it's worth noting that this number has been subject to change since this comic came out. I feel like the best way to describe them is as an intergalactic police force charged with maintaining law and order across the universe and Abin Sur had been in charge of Sector 2814, under which Earth fell as well. When the Ring chose Hal as its new bearer, it immediately made him the new Green Lantern for Sector 2814. The Ring itself is forged in the planet of Oa, home to the Guardians, an alien race of immortals who founded the Green Lantern Corps. What is willpower actually doing to his body? If you have been reading DC Comics long enough, I think you will know that Green Lanterns like Kyle Rayner and Jessica Cruz are far from being the traditional superhero before they obviously get their Green Lantern training. While guys like Guy Gardner, John Stewart, and Hal Jordan were at least in some line of work that expected some physical fitness from them, the two that I mentioned earlier were woefully lacking in this matter. The point I'm trying to make is that the Ring doesn't choose an individual based on their physical prowess and fitness. In fact, if anything, the Ring simply amplifies their physical attributes alongside granting them the obvious power to create hard light constructs. The power to create hard light constructs, while it sounds simple, is anything but that, as it requires immense willpower to create even the simplest ones, and it is shown to be extremely mentally taxing, causing physical collapse if someone untrained tries to use the Ring. I remember in Rebirth issue number 4, Green Arrow tries to use a power ring to shoot a single construct arrow, which leads him to collapse from cardiac and mental exhaustion, describing the feeling like he hasn't slept for days. I believe he famously told Hal Jordan how he couldn't fathom the Lantern's ability to endure that enormous mental load continuously. In fact, outside of Hal Jordan and Kyle Rayner, every other Lantern has struggled in their early days to cope with the load that the Ring puts on their body by draining their willpower. So, why do the Lanterns use their willpower to power their rings? Why not any other emotion? Well, to understand this, I think I need to tell you a little about the emotional spectrums in DC Comics. In the DC lore, every sentient emotion generates a tangible energy across a cosmic spectrum, where each color corresponds to a distinct emotional frequency. For instance, green responds to willpower, red to rage, orange to avarice, yellow to fear, blue to hope, indigo to compassion, and violet to love, with each of these emotional spectrums having their own lantern core. There are also the white lanterns and the black lanterns, but I feel like those deserve a video of their own. Let me know if I should do a video covering each of the lantern core. Coming back to the point, it is because of this reason that Hal Jordan and the rest of the Corps have to rely on willpower, despite the mental and physical toll it takes on them. What makes Hal Jordan special is the fact that this guy possesses the greatest amount of willpower, not just among the Lanterns from Earth, but among all the Green Lanterns across the universe in the Corps' history. I want you to let that sink in. How does he survive in outer space? Part of the job description, I think, when it comes to being an intergalactic police officer, is flying across the vacuum of space into planets where the atmosphere might not be conducive to one's species. So how does Hal Jordan, a human from Earth, manage to combat threats across the universe while not being killed before he even throws a single punch? One of the perks of being a Green Lantern is that the Ring creates a thin field around its wearer, which allows them to breathe in even the most inhospitable conditions. I think the exact science behind it is not known, but this is the reason given in most comics as to how Hal Jordan is able to survive in outer space. The Ring's power, however, is not just limited to that, because even the Green Lantern's uniform is actually a hard light construct which protects the wearer from not just physical blasts and energy blasts, but also from the cosmic radiation of space. The suit and the aura surrounding him regulate his temperature, keeping it optimal for survival in space and in other hostile places. I wish I could say the same about his mask, though, unfortunately. The mask is there to simply protect his identity, like most other superheroes. While the mask is constructed by the Ring as well, I believe, there isn't any specific function it serves outside of concealing his identity. I think it's important to note that the Lantern John Stewart does away with this, as he doesn't have any mask on. I hope you are clear now regarding how Hal Jordan survives the rigors of outer space in his adventures as the Green Lantern and a member of the Justice League. What really happened to his body when he became Parallax? In the original story laid out in Emerald, Twilight, and Zero Hour, after the destruction of Coast City during the events of the Reign of the Supermen storyline by the cyborg Superman with the help of Mongol, Hal Jordan begins to experience a mental breakdown as he is unable to cope with the trauma. In his quest to undo the tragedy, Hal begins to use his power to create constructs of the city that he once loved, failing each time due to not having enough power. Consumed by grief and rage, Hal decides the only course of action to undo the tragedy is to claim the power of the Green Lanterns in its entirety for himself. To which end, he flies to Oa and single-handedly fights every single Green Lantern present and claims their rings for himself, while also completely absorbing the central power battery. By doing this, he transcends his mortality and his status as a Green Lantern, becoming an all-powerful being called Parallax, one of the strongest villains in DC Comics history, in my opinion. I feel like this had to be one of the biggest falls from grace that any hero has ever experienced, both within and outside of DC Comics. The fact that it was Hal Jordan, who was considered a fount of willpower, who broke in this manner, made it hit even harder. His personality changes into a megalomaniacal one, even as white streaks appear on his temples and numerous rings of his fallen compatriots adorn his fingers. The irony is that, at this point, Parallax doesn't even need those rings to manifest his ability, as his very body has become a conduit for the green spectrum. This entire story would, however, be retconned in 2004 during Jeff Johns' run, where he says that Hal's madness and transformation were caused by him being infected by an entity called Parallax, which was the manifestation of the yellow spectrum of fear. This is what had led him to commit all those evil deeds. Honestly, I think I prefer the original story better, as it makes his final redemption arc feel much more significant. What do you think? Do you prefer the tragic fallen hero or the victim who was manipulated and exploited by an ancient cosmic entity? I know fan opinion is divided on this topic, so let me know your thoughts in the comments. Has Hal actually died, and what happened to his body each time? During his time as Parallax, Hal finally sees the errors of his way, using his power in an effort to reignite a dying sun during the events of the final night to save the Earth, dying a heroic death in one of my favorite redemption arcs. I think that the cool thing is that Hal Jordan remained dead for a long time, with the mantle of Green Lantern for Sector 2814 being passed down to Kyle Rayner. In the meantime, we saw Hal's soul get summoned from purgatory to bond with the spirit of Vengeance Spectre in an attempt to atone for his sins. Honestly, I loved what DC was doing with Hal and Spectre, even if it meant that he was no longer a Green Lantern. In my opinion, it fit the scope of his fall from grace and was a natural transition for a character of his stature. However, I think we all know people in comic books rarely stayed dead, especially one as important as Hal Jordan, and during Jeff Johns' Rebirth comics, both Parallax and the Spectre are separated from Hal's soul, while his body, which is shown to have been preserved in the sun, retrieved by Ganthet and Kyle Rayner, and united with his soul, bringing him back from the dead. I know a lot of people think that he died during the Blackest Night storyline as well, but this isn't really accurate. In the Blackest Night story, Nekron's black ring attaches itself to Hal even though he is alive, temporarily converting his living body into an undead Black Lantern. However, unlike the resurrection we see in Rebirth, at the end of the Blackest Night story, his body is fully restored to full vitality after being cleansed of death by the white light of creation. Next, we have the events of the Wrath of the First Lantern in Green Lantern Volume 5, issue number 20 from 2013, where Hal finds himself trapped in the nether realm known as the Dead Zone after he throws himself off a cliff to commit suicide to defeat Volthoom. Once in the Dead Zone, he slips on the Black Lantern power ring he had acquired from Black Hand, which makes his body a reanimated corpse that lets him to summon and command Nekron to defeat Volthoom. Following Volthoom's fall, I believe the Black Ring tried to fully claim Hal, but by using his indomitable willpower, he is able to draw a green ring to himself, kickstarting his heart and reversing his physical state back to life. Come to think of it, I feel like this guy seems to have a penchant for dying. I think it will be interesting to see how the new TV series deals with his death. Can the ring actually run out, and what happens to him then? I think we all know how a Green Lantern's power ring is considered one of the most powerful artifacts in the entire universe, but despite its nigh-endless power, it has a fatal weakness. The Green Lantern power ring needs to be recharged every now and again, because once it runs out of juice, Hal's ring completely shuts off, stripping away all his abilities, leaving him vulnerable. For instance, if his ring ran out of power mid-flight in space, the aura that protects him along with his uniform would all disappear, leaving him to die a painful death. Thankfully, the ring does update him on what percentage its battery is in. In the earlier comics from the Silver and Bronze Ages, I believe that the ring battery depleted in 24 hours regardless of use. This changed during the modern era, where the battery of the ring depended on how it was used. What I mean by this is that if the ring was just used for flight or making simple constructs, it would drain at a much slower pace than if it were used continuously for prolonged periods to create numerous complex constructs. For decades, Hal Jordan's ring also had a weakness to the color yellow, which Jeff Johns' retcon explained as being caused by the impurity of the Parallax entity within the central battery. There is also the fact that, in order to charge the ring, Hal and the Lanterns have to hold it against their battery and chant their famous oath, "In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight, let all those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's light." I think this whole recitation of their oath has not always been consistent, as there have been Lanterns who have charged their rings without the oath being said aloud. Regardless, a power ring without juice is just a fancy trinket with no function, leaving Hal without any of his powers. Is Hal really the first human Green Lantern? Despite being undoubtedly the greatest Green Lantern, in my opinion, unfortunately, Hal is not the first human to join the Green Lantern Corps. Well, technically, I think if you look at the real-world publication history, he is the first human inducted into it, since he did make his debut all the way back in 1959, but DC has continuously retconned his first human lantern status over the years. I believe that the distinction goes to a warrior monk from ancient China who lived during the Tang Dynasty's rule around 660 AD, making his appearance in Green Lantern Dragon Lords, issue number 1 in 2001. It tells the story of how Zhong Li's temple is destroyed by the Emperor's royal guards for sheltering one of his concubines. One thing leads to another, and Zhong is visited by a guardian after he is scanned by the ring and chosen as a suitable host. He is given a ring and a power battery, after which he is told to use the power to oppose evil, ease suffering, and protect the innocent. The rest of the comic deals with how Zhong comes to terms with his newfound status as he resolves his personal quest and sets out on becoming the first ever human Green Lantern. Honestly, when I read this comic, I loved it so much because the character of Zhong Li is actually pretty fascinating, and the story is a perfect blend of sci-fi and historical period pieces. Following Zhong Li's stint as the Green Lantern of Sector 2814, we have Alan Scott, who predates Hal Jordan, both in terms of in-universe lore and publication history, having made his debut in 1940 in the All-American Comics issue number 16. The catch, however, lies in the fact that despite being called the Green Lantern, Alan Scott doesn't belong to the modern understanding of the Green Lantern Corps, as he was never a part of it, and his ring is fundamentally different from the Oan power ring. His ring is actually powered by a mystical artifact called the Starheart, making his powers magical in nature. I personally love the character of Alan Scott because technically he will always be the first Green Lantern in my heart, despite being vastly weaker than Hal and less popular. It is only after that the DC lore comes to Hal Jordan, which technically makes him the second human to join the Green Lantern Corps. Who is Hal Jordan in HBO's Lanterns? In the ongoing Lanterns TV show, Hal Jordan is being played by the actor Kyle Chandler, and I think it's fair to say it's not the Hal we are used to seeing from the comics. While the TV show character shares a similar backstory to that of his comic book counterpart, I feel that we cannot say the same with regard to his demeanor. While it is not explicitly stated anywhere, my initial impression of Hal in the TV show is that he never truly overcame fear. He just learned to avoid it by isolating himself from the world. This is evidenced by the fact that there is no Carol Ferris in the picture, which is his traditional love interest. It seems like this Hal shut himself off from love so that he never has to face the pain of losing a loved one again. I feel like there is also the fact that his overall attitude is that of a grizzled, disenchanted loner, which is not at all the personality you would associate with someone who is supposed to be the epitome of willpower. The series doesn't really follow a linear path as it jumps between various events in the past and present, which sets up the shocking episode finale, spoiler alert, where Hal is seen dead, shot through the head on the steps of a stadium. One thing I feel like we need to note here is that the TV show establishes the presence of shape-shifting aliens, so the dead Hal Jordan might not even be really him. The fact that he also doesn't have his ring might further lead credence to this theory. For now, though, there isn't any official word about how permanent Chandler's death is going to be on screen. As we know, his co-star Aaron Pierre is set to appear in the Superman sequel Man of Tomorrow, and as far as I know, Chandler has not been locked into any such future crossover films. As I mentioned earlier, since the show uses a non-linear style of storytelling, we are guaranteed to see Hal Jordan play an important role throughout the season, but I guess we will have to wait and see whether he truly has a future in the new DCU. In the end, I'm just glad that we are finally actually getting a live-action Green Lantern adaptation, which is something fans have been asking for ever since the much-maligned Green Lantern film starring Ryan Reynolds came out. This might be a hot take, but I actually think that movie was quite good, despite the hate it gets for the CGI overdose, among other things. Death is nothing new to Hal Jordan, as I have told you in this video, so despite that shocking ending, there might still be a lot in store for both him and us. I mean, it would be actually super ballsy for the people behind the show to totally kill off the most iconic Green Lantern permanently in the very first episode. Regardless, the show has looked promising so far, in my opinion. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. For now, though, it's time for me to say goodbye. I hope to see you soon in the next one. Until then, stay safe and stay marvelous.